So the last thing in the world you're going to expect is somebody's going to be murdered in front of a whole load of witnesses.
In 2011, we interviewed Chris Lambrianou.
Standing by, Brian, all cameras be in position.
He spent 18 years behind bars.
The body was collected, the car was destroyed, and the body was taken out to sea and disposed of there.
Chris Lambrianou, former East End gangster who thought nothing of armed robbery, safe blowing, fraud, and even attempted murder. In prison, Chris became a born-again Christian and turned his life around.
If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Borstal, approved school, 2 years in the Verne Portland for blowing safes, culminated in getting life for a murder that I didn't commit. Gangland life was a conglomeration of different firms, coming from different angles, doing different things. Long firm, protection money, nightclubs, gambling had just come in, pavement artists, people would go out and take the wage snatching, bank robbery, post office robbery. They were all specialists in their field. We even had people like a man called Johnny the Bosch, who you'd bring in and he could open any door. He was what you call a twirler. He could twirl the keys. And there was them kind of characters. Every firm had a character. And in them days, you'd meet up at lunchtime in a pub, every different characters, different firms, and firms would cross each other. Well, we've got a bit of work here, we need your man here, or we need that guy here. And so firms were interchanging all the time. I wasn't educated as a young boy. I was born just as the war started. There was a lot of rebuilding to be done. And there was not the things that are around for kids today. Gangster life in London in the 60s was not ad hoc like it is now. Every youngster wants to be a gangster. In them days, there were the firms. So you had all these kind of different groupings of people. Prostitution was run by the Maltese. The clever boys knew how to get in and do the long firm stuff. And they could open an office and shut it down and get a note of promise, and they'd pay the initial money that was owed, and then have a big buy-up and from several companies, and everything was based on trust, and trust was all the last thing these guys were thinking of. And the wage snatchers, they would meticulously plot different robberies from Securicore wagons, which weren't as tight as they are today, or post offices or banks, because in the old days 2 or 3 people would take a bag to the bank, and people would jump out on them, spray them with ammonia, hit them with koshes, and far worse than they did in the Great Train Robbery. But actually, many of the train robbers were actually, pavement artists, that's what we called them. Not drawers of pictures, but out on the pavement getting it. And there were heavy people, like the twins, who minded different clubs and gambling and all the rest of it. Opportunists. Basically, I got involved with them because I didn't really want to be involved with them, because I was doing okay. I mean, I decided that London, there was no money really in London. The bigger money was in the big cities like Birmingham, Manchester. Well, Birmingham, for instance, and Coventry, there was a lot of money. The car industry had just boomed. So there were opportunities to open gambling clubs there, Leicester, right across the Midlands. And so that's what I was doing. And I went to buy some American dollars from somebody at the Blind Beggar, and my car was having a service, and I came out, I was waiting for a bus, and the guy called Ronnie Bender, who went down with us, came by, and he said, "Hello, Chris, want a lift?" So I said, "Yeah, you give me a lift to my house." So Ronnie Bender took me home and dropped me off, and that was as far as I was going to be concerned. But then about an hour later, Ronnie Bender came to my house and said, "Chris," he said, "the twins want to meet you." I said, "Look, Ron, I'm not in, you haven't found me, have a few quid and I'll see you later." Couldn't walk away. So I went down there and got introduced to Reggie and Ronnie, and what you doing, what you up to. And I said, well, I'm in the Midlands and I'm doing this, that and the other. Didn't tell them everything, but told them some of it. And they said, well, we just opened a club in Leicester. Can you get some of your friends over to our gambling place? And I said, what I can do. Shook my hand and had a nice evening with them. And I introduced them gamblers to their clubs, and that was it. So I kind of was in, really. So whenever I came down to London, they'd want me to go around and see them and talk about this, that and the other, and they had something to put me into, and likewise. So that's really how I got in with them. But I was never one of their firm. I didn't want to be at one of their firm. As far as I was concerned, their firm were very poor. You know, they relied on handouts and stuff like that, where I was moving with some bigger fish up in the Midlands. In fact, when Charlie Kray came up to the Midlands with Mickey Riley, Billy Hill's nephew, they were amazed at kind of the surroundings, you know, and the people and the houses had access to, you know. I'd come down for the weekend, and the Krays it was their mother's birthday. So we'd gone to the pub to pay our respects and wish Violet happy birthday and what have you. Then we left them and we went to a pub on the Hackney Road, and we had a drink in there, and there was some debate about where we should go next. My idea, I want to go to the West End. And Tony said to me, no, let's go to the Regency. So Tony said, well, look, they've never been to the Regency, let's go there. I didn't want to go to the Regency because Saturday night gangsters, you get them out, they're drunk and they cause problems and all the rest of it. But we did go. And whilst we were there, Jack the Hat McVitie came over. Hello Chris, how you going? And chatting away. After about an hour or so, he said, where you going? I said, well, we're going to the West End. But we'd been invited to a party. Well, party, I'm up for that. I'm coming to that one. So we all piled in this car because my car's parked up. So in them days, it didn't matter whether you had a drink. I mean, the law wasn't such that you would stop for breathalyzers and all the rest of it back in the 60s. So we went to a girl called Blonde Carol's house where this party was. All got Ajax car and all went in. There were other people down there. So the last thing in the world you're going to expect is somebody's going to be murdered in front of a whole load of witnesses. So we go down, Jack runs into the room. And what I can't understand is a week before, I'd seen Reggie and Jack shaking hands, or were talking to each other when they sat on a table privately. So the last thing in my mind is that Reggie's going to attack him. So when we go down the party, some kind of altercation starts, and Reggie is talking to Jack. Ronnie comes over and punches Jack in front of all these witnesses. And the next thing, it just kicks off. Now I get very upset about this and make my position known. So I go out to the bottom of the stairs and Ronnie comes out and said, what's the problem? I said, Ronnie, we didn't come down here for this. We come down here for a party. And he said to a guy called Connie Whitehead, take him home. So Connie Whitehead dropped me off back at my house. And my dad was alive, God rest his soul. And I walked in and I sat there with my dad. He said, what's the matter, where's Tony? I said, well, Dad, I'm going to go and get him. And I went and got a gun, 38 Webley, and called a taxi, and I went back to the house, Blonde Carol's house. I went and got my car and then went back to Blonde Carol's house and knocked at the door, and Ronnie Bender came up. I said, where's Tony? He said, he's not here. So I went to turn away, said, Chris, don't leave me. I said, what do you mean, don't? What's the matter? He said, they've killed Jack. No, I said, never in a million years, not in front of all them people. He said, he's downstairs. He's dead. So I said, what's your instructions? He said, to get rid of him. I said, well, Blonde Carol will be back in a minute. There's 2 children asleep upstairs and you're meant to get rid of him on your own. What are you going to do? Well, they told me to throw him over the railway bridge and the train would mash him up. I couldn't leave him. The guy had not long been out of the army. The Krays employed him as a driver. and thereby, incapable of doing it. He's meant to throw Jack over his shoulder, take him up to the railway bridge, which is maybe 50 yards away, chuck him over, and that was to be his duty. The Krays had run off and left him there with it. So anyway, I go in, I said, listen, get yourself a pair of socks, put them on your hands, put the socks on our hands, and we cleaned that place down from top to bottom, and Jack was laying in the middle of the room. I went upstairs and I took an eider down off of Blonde Carroll's bed, wrapped him in it. In the meantime, a knock at the door and Tony comes back. So he'd been home and my dad said I'd gone looking for him and Tony knew where I'd go. And so he came in and I roped him into helping us get Jack. So then there's an argument about who's going to drive Jack's car. And Ronnie Bender said, I'm not going to drive it. And Tony says, somebody's got to drive it. In the meantime, Blonde Carroll comes back, so this is a tragedy of errors. Never mind about a comedy of errors, it's a tragedy of errors. So she's told to go into the bedroom and stay there. There's been a bit of an argument, a fight, it's got to be cleaned up. Tony, I and Ronnie Bender get Jack into his car on the back seat. Tony drives the car. We follow Tony up from Evering Road and going round, and I'll tell you the truth, a police car fell in behind Tony. There is no way they're going to take my brother. It hadn't long been that Harry Roberts had killed 3 policemen. And that night, it could have happened that maybe I might have done the same thing. For whatever reason they did it, I don't know. But I'd have been doing it to get my brother out of, and then finished up maybe never ever getting out of prison ever. But you can see the consequences of them drunk, Reggie on speed because he weren't able to sleep and everything else over the death of his wife. And he was the most saddest man you could meet, Reggie. The police didn't stop Tony in the car. We went, you're never going to believe this. What we decided to do was take it through the Blackwall Tunnel and drop it on the Richardson patch. So that's what we did. We took it through the Blackwall Tunnel, and strangely enough, the car broke down outside a church, and there were confetti on the floor and everything else. And we went around in circles, finally found Tony, and he showed us where the car was. And that remained in my memory, that it was outside the church. It was Saturday night, and the confetti was all around. And that was the last I heard of it. And then we went and saw, or Ronnie Bender went and told Charlie Kray. And Charlie hit the roof because he said, there was other friends who lived on that manor as well, and it could fall on them. So apparently, so I'm led to believe the body was collected, the car was destroyed, and the body was taken out to sea and disposed of there. So we finished up at the Old Bailey on one of the longest murder trials in criminal history. And from the get-go, it was a conviction. And I'm sitting there with my head in my hands because I can't believe what's going on. It was... Had I laid one finger on a man that died? No, I hadn't. Had I wanted him dead? No, I didn't. It just turned out that he went to a party with us, with 2 other strange guys. There was already loads of people there, fight starts. Because I don't say nothing, I get 15 years. We always wanted what America had. We always wanted our Al Capone. We always wanted our Legs Diamond. We always wanted our Dutch Schultz. We always wanted what America had. We were going to the pictures, and the early cinema was all about gangsters, all about these George Raft and all these top stars playing these parts, because they were actually associating with the people, so they didn't know how to play the part. So we had finally got it with the Richardsons. Well, the Richardsons were very powerful because the Richardsons, if they had anything, they had money. And money in itself is power. But they also had, with Eddie and Frank, were prepared, with other members of the firm, were prepared to back it up. But I'm sure that not everything was run by Charlie or run by him. He was too busy, Charlie, venturing off, doing this and that. And that's where Charlie was a threat, because Charlie was meeting government officials, he was meeting MPs from other countries, he was meeting heads of state. And you know that as I do, you know, that's factual, that was actually happening. Can you imagine how threatening that is to other people? You're dealing with Smith, used to be the Premier of South Africa. And, you know, people like that. So, and you're dealing with all his cohorts, as it were. And if there's firms, in that scale, the Richardsons are very small. But the firm that was running South Africa, you know, they were pretty tough people, pretty ruthless people. So Charlie had his hands full there, where Eddie and Frank were running, literally doing what they were doing in London. The Richardsons would hurt you, but they never killed anybody. You know, they weren't that kind of people. Where, you know, there was no raving lunatic, i.e. Ronnie, to lose total control. Eddie and Frank together were a lethal combination. Eddie knew how far to push it, so did Frank. They knew just when to stop. Eddie, my experience of Eddie were, I could say hello to him, I found him okay. But Eddie could be quite ruthless. And along with Frank, that was a very, very dangerous combination. Would take everything to extreme, but not too extreme. They knew it was kind of organised, it was strong, but they knew exactly when to stop. Frankie Fraser, you didn't mess about with them kind of people. They had the West End sewn up. They had several other enterprises sewn up as well. One of them being Heathrow Airport, which was their car parking and other things. Frank was somebody, you know, I like Frank an awful lot because I spent time with him in prison. And if I will say one thing, he was loyal to the men in prison. He would die for them if he felt something was unjust. Frank, but on the other hand, out on the street, Frank was just, you know, doing what Frank did. Terrifying. Even today, he'll tell you he's not, you know, his beloved axe or his, you know, whatever he was using, his tool of choice, as it were. Charlie Richardson, I knew about him, I knew of him, but I never actually met him till I went into prison. I mean, Charlie was a businessman. And all my time in prison, I never see Charlie ever threaten anybody. He didn't need to. He was well versed, well read, very, very affable man. I mean, one time I said, Charlie, what are you talking that man? He was a tramp. I think we was in Maidstone prison on the lifer wing or long-term wing. And he said, Chris, everybody's got a story. Another time he said to me, Chris, he said, I cried for a man with no shoes until I met a man with no feet. That was Charlie Richardson. Great love of his family. I never see him raise his voice to anybody. I never see him attack anybody. And I never see him ever threaten anybody. All I ever see Charlie Richardson do was help people. Charlie Richardson was running a scrapyard. I mean, give you an instance of Charlie Richardson. He's on the run, he goes up to Canada. Not for violence, but for something else. Anyway, he gets off the plane, him and his dad. They're driving along and he sees a scrapyard. And he sees the prices they're charging at this scrapyard, or they're paying for scrap metal. A mile down the road, Charlie decides to open up another scrapyard. So this was a guy had initiative. He could go and, he had drive, he could set something up for nothing. Anything he ever got crooked, he could have got straight. And has done. Long-firm fraud works in such a way that you hire an office in an area, say, like Great Portland Street or Oxford Street. There's offices everywhere. And what you do, you get a line of credit, i.e. if it's kind of shoes. you'll buy a 50 pair of shoes and you'll pay them. You'll buy 100 pair of sandals and you'll pay them. But then you'll go for the big one, and after a while, and you'll hit them maybe for 5,000 pairs of shoes. But you'll talk to the shoemaker and say, we want this order, but quite frankly, we don't have the ability to pay you up front. But as soon as we are paid for it, and that's the way businesses run. You'll receive your check, and invariably they'll give the shoes, or they'll give the goods to the people running the company, who will then put it in a storage, and will just be selling it off, making quite a good amount of money. And then when they've fleeced every other big company, they'll just fold, and then the vendors will be looking for their money, and they'll go to the offices or send bailiffs around there. There'll be nobody there. It's just gone. And that's basically long firms. That would be Charlie's forte. He would be able to do it. But invariably you have a front man, somebody who's affable and outgoing and knows the business world and needs a few quid. You stick him up the front, and he's the one who does all the talking. He wears the bowler hat and the umbrella and the black tie and waistcoat and everything else, and he's the one who deals with the punters, as it were, and then he vanishes into thin air. I mean, I can relate one incident where there was a long firm in Great Portland Street, and certain things went on in that long firm that Charlie knew nothing about. He was in South Africa, he had a perlite mine out there, and he did not know what was happening in London. The story is that I'd met some guys up in Birmingham, and they told me about this firm down in London, Great Portland Street. I thought, that sounds interesting, Great Portland Street, next to Hyde Park, Millionaires Row and all the rest of it. So I went down there to have a little nose around and found I liked it, so I got put in. But the firm was struggling because it didn't have anybody who had the presence to make it really work, because the boys were from South London and we were from East London and hardly businessmen, you understand? So, I mean, we went up to funny business, but not straight business. Anyway, I said I knew a Jewish guy called Kenny, who was a master at the long firm. And he knew a guy from Manchester who was a master at the long firm. So he turned around and told me if ever I needed anything, I could put this guy in, I would. So I had this guy's telephone number, and I rang him and told him about the business down in Great Portland Street, and his ears pricked up immediately. He saw a few quid in it, and down he came. Immaculately dressed, dark wavy hair, good looking man, and he came down, he started to run the firm. And we were getting a few quid, and he came down with a friend and a girlfriend. So the firm was doing okay, but it came to a bank holiday. And Tony and I said, well, look, we want a Mark 10, which was the car to have at that time, Jaguar. And some of the other lads wanted the Jaguars as well. And when it came to his turn, he got a bull-nosed Morris. And it really put his nose out of joint. And therefore, he said, well, if I don't get a better car than this, he said, I'm going to grasp the firm. It's a wrong thing to say in that kind of company. But I never took it literally, and I didn't think he would do, because of the consequences of something like that. Well, anyway, we all took off and went our different directions. And Tony and I went down to Margate and had a great time. On the Tuesday, we went back to the firm, 9 o'clock in the morning. And when I walk in, there's George Cornell and a few other faces, and they've got this guy taped up to electrodes, and they're giving him electric shocks, and also his power as well. Anyway, I went in and I said, what's happening here? I brought these guys down. What's occurring? Well, they've grassed us, Chris. I said, what do you mean grassed? Well, they had the car and they haven't got it, so it must be they've given it to the police and it's on top. I said, they wouldn't be here if it's on top. What happened with the car? And he turned around, the young guy with dark hair, and said we left it outside the company. We never ever took it. Left it in Great Portland Street. Well, the police had started lifting cars and taking them over Vauxhall Bridge. So I said, well, don't do anything else. Leave it as it is and let me see if I can get it. And I went over to Vauxhall Bridge and the car was waiting there, and I paid the £20 odd or whatever it was and brought the car back to the hire company, give it back to them. And I said, I've got the car back, it's not on top. But in the meantime, he was screaming like a what's her name, and I said, listen, you're out of this. And I got him, I said, I don't do all that kind of stuff. And we got him in the car and we took him over to Notting Hill, to where they were living at the time. But funny enough, when I was in jail, I never see him, never got a letter, never got anything. But I literally saved his life, because if we hadn't walked in and stopped what they were doing, they would have literally more or less taken his life, because he threatened, certain people. Whether Eddie was running the company or whether, and with Frank, I don't know. But I know Charlie certain wasn't, because he didn't know nothing about the company. And that's what I mean. People stick people's names up all the time. If people were in trouble, they go, oh, well, Reggie and Ronnie will be down to see you. Reggie and Ronnie never knew nothing about it. Oh, Charlie Richardson is going to hear about this. Charlie Richardson is in South Africa. He don't know nothing about it. And that's what happens in the world, They've got a big brother. My big brother will come down and sort you out. Or my dad, have you seen the size of him? That's what happens. Well, I wasn't there, so I don't really know exactly what did happen. All I know was the next day it was all over the papers. They had kicked off there with two firms, and nobody knew exactly who it was at the time. And then it came up with the Richardsons were involved. I knew Charlie wasn't involved, because I knew Charlie was in South Africa. But it could only be Eddie, and it could only be Frank Fraser. And I know Frank got shot in the leg, and I know Eddie got shot somewhere as well. But there was Hart who got shot. That was from the other firm. Henry Bottoms was there, and the Haywoods. And this had been some rivalry that had been going on, something to do with protection. It was a kind of a whole thing that had gone and finally kicked off in this Mr. Smith's. And so what happened from there was the police then said, we've got a firm that we need to get off the streets, because they were involved in other stuff. Another man that they tuned up as well was Eric Mason. They took him back to their place just off of Tottenham Court Road, and they gave him a severe beating. Yeah, well, it was Eddie and Frank. And Eric thought, that he could challenge him, and they said, well, let's talk about this, took him back, and he finished up in the hospital in Holloway. And that was a time that all the firms came together. The firms that came together and visited Eric was the Nashes, there was Ronnie Knight, there was myself, there was the Twins and their firm. And when Eric came out of hospital, Reggie gave him a gun to go and start the war. And Eric sold the gun and took off and went to Blackpool, because he didn't want to be, he had a severe beating, he'd almost died, and he didn't want no more of it, he'd had enough. And the Twins, in their way, by giving them a gun, thought that, let him kick off and let him start the war. But in the meantime, it kicks off at Mr. Smith's. And I think Charlie was put up as a leader of this notorious torture gang. And whilst there may have been some incidents, I don't think it was Charlie. Charlie just got the bad end of the stick. And it was Eddie and Frank that were the mainstays of the Richardson firm. Now, he was friendly with the Twins, but he was more friendly with the Richardsons, because I told you, people really didn't want to be on the Kray firm. There weren't a lot of money involved. The twins had all the money, they could spend it like water. But the firm hardly had any money at all. That's why I never wanted to be on them. And I think maybe George Cornell had the same kind of feelings. I don't want to be on the Kray firm, there's nothing there for me. But I could exploit the Richardsons, there's money there. You know, they were more, how can I put it, they were more about getting hold of money, seeing opportunities and following them through. And that was because they had all the one-armed bandits, of course, in most of the clubs in London, which was like a lot of money involved there. And so that's where Cornell went and became an enforcer for them. I think personally he'd insulted Ronnie and he had to be dealt with. I mean, somebody called Ronnie a fat puff. What happened? The guy got his jaw broke. Donahue, who was one of their henchmen, one of their chief henchmen, he got shot for an insult. So they were, it could not take an awful lot for Ronnie to want to kill somebody. One day I saw him walking away from the Carpenter's Arms, and as he was walking away, overcoat on, head down, he just looked a man that was lost. He was easy prey to Ronnie, I will say that. Reggie in himself really wasn't a murderer. Reggie would talk to people, Reggie was quite affable, but Ronnie, when he didn't take his Stemisol, which was a drug to keep him, his paranoia and everything else down, he was out of control. And it could have happened to anybody. Hence what happened to the blind beggar. He just walked in and shot a guy. Can I tell you a little story? If you go back to biblical times, you've got Moses with a staff. In hand, it was in control. The minute he throws that staff on the floor, it turns into a snake. Out of hand, it's out of control. And that was Ronnie Kray. Without the medication, without proper support, that man should have been put somewhere whereabouts. He would have been taken care of, looked after in the proper way. And he had a still vice-like grip on Reggie's emotions and everything else. And I think many things happened that would never have happened, both to Charlie and Reggie, if it hadn't have been for Ronnie, There was no relationship. Despite what people may think, the Krays did not like the Richardsons, and the Richardsons didn't really have any one opinion or the other about the Krays. They were both doing their own things in different... The only place where the two firms would actually meet, and it wasn't that often, was in the West End. It's a very small world, and it was even smaller in them days. Now it's fractured, it's all over the place. But in them days, there was only a select group of people. And the Krays would... when they opened up this celebrity club, people would go there. The Latin Quarter, people would go there. The Astor, people would go there. These were the kind of Esmeralda's Barn, people would go there. There was gambling clubs, so people would go there. But remember, we were all suited and booted and all the rest of it, smart men. Always polished our shoes, wore a nice tie and waistcoat and all the rest of it. And you were civil to each other. The Richardsons were the heavyweights in the West End itself. But we all went there. The heavy firms, I'm talking about the pavement artists, which I've described, or the bank robbers, they would all... the police didn't have to look too far for them, because as soon as anything went off in London, they'd head straight for the Latin Court and they'd all be sitting at the top table, the bottles of champagne, the pretty girls and all the rest of it. So where'd they get the money from to be sitting at the top table? They got it from a wage snatch, or they got it from, that's where they'd want to sit, up there. So the police would just sit there and see who was sitting at the top table, and what had kicked off that day, nicked. You understand? And they wondered why. But in Charlie's case, the police built a great big thing about it, and he went down for 25 years. 10 more than Eddie, 10 more than Frank, And it was never easy for him in prison. Never easy. Because they always thought he was too clever for them. I think the media were unfair. The media wanted them. We wanted this gangster cult to grow, and we had it there. Shootings at Mr. Smith, torture trial, everything they could, you know. Charlie once said to me, Chris, they've accused me of everything but killing President Kennedy. And that's a fact. So they threw everything at its brother at him, and Charlie didn't say nothing. We lived by a code. So Charlie got 25. And 25 years for Charlie was not an easy task. It was absolutely a devastating thing. For one, at that time, he loved a girl very deeply, South African girl. His businesses were just starting to get going in South Africa. He had so much going, and it vanished overnight. They needed a leader. They needed somebody with intelligence, and it was Charlie. When we were in, in Maidstone, I'd go into his cell and we'd sit there and have a chat about this, that and the other, or books or something that was going on in the world. So I'd go in to see Charlie today. I said, Charlie, I've got this record, I think you should listen to it. So, because he was really kind of Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, that kind of thing. He said, what's it called? So I said, well, let me put it on and see. It was called Autobahn by Kraftwerk. So it started off this music, which is kind of way out there, but it's kind of cool, you know what I mean? And I liked it. I like Van Morrison, I liked Al Stewart, Bedsitter Images, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. All that kind of music really I liked, because it touched something inside your soul. This kind of Wish You Were Here was another one. I'll go on and on forever. And anyway, I'm talking to Charlie about this Kraftwerk, so he put it on. He said, Chris, he said, you know what this reminds me of? He said, a train ride. He said, you get your chair there and I'll get my chair here. So you turn your chair around that way and I'm behind you and we're on a train. He's going to me, well, he said, do you know where we're going now? So I said, no. He said, we're heading to Germany. And he was telling me about all the different places that he's seen. And we're on a train, we're literally on a train. And the movement of the music and everything else, and that was Kraftwerk. The only time we ever had a bit of an altercation was we were cooking a curry in prison, because we were allowed to make our own food. And we'd have to present it to all the KM in Durham E-Wing. And we'd put some colouring into the curry to make it acceptable to Bruce Reynolds, the train robber, who was a connoisseur of food, or so we were led to believe. Anyway, we started off and we finished up getting it green. And I said, Charlie, let's put some red in that and we might get it back to more a browny colour. Well, it was a hodgepodge, you understand what I'm saying? I said, Charlie, it's your fault. He said, no, it's your fault. But no, you don't. Charlie was okay. Yeah. And I think anybody you speak to about Charlie Richardson, they'll say he helped him. And he was a good old boy. I can't see the man I'm looking at being as evil as they portrayed him to be. With Ronnie, he had that presence, Ronnie Kray. Reggie was a silent, quiet man, so you never quite knew what you were getting with Reggie. But with Ronnie, you'd only have to look at him and you knew, because he had that kind of aura, he had that kind of energy around him. I can't see Charlie needing to do that, you understand what I'm saying? Rumour had it about Eddie and Frank, but I never heard any rumours about Charlie. Charlie wasn't a player in the West End. Charlie weren't a player anywhere. He was more interested in getting money. Money was what Charlie, he didn't want to be a heavyweight villain or anything else like that. Charlie, in his mind, I think, was looking for a pot of gold. In fact, the story he told me once, he told me about the richest mine ever found. He was out in America somewhere. And these two brothers had mined this piece of land for age yonks. And they decided to give it up. And the other brothers said, well, let's leave it for another few months and see where it goes. And they, in despair, they let it go. Charlie told me, 1 foot from where they stopped mining, they found the biggest seam ever in America. And that's Charlie, looking for something you know, really, and fell in love with in South Africa. Fell in love with the people. Fell in love with the ambience of it all. You know, that was Charlie. Charlie's a Capricorn, family orientated. I'm the same. You understand? Got charm. He's a decent man inside. You speak to Charlie, but you never know he was the kind of man they've described as this torturer, this, that. Charlie Richardson has helped so many people as an educator. In prison, I saw Charlie Richardson going in and on a sociology class with Stan Taylor and Laurie Cohen, two of the most eminent professors at Durham University. I said, Charlie, what are you doing in there? He said, well, you need to come along and listen. And I did. And I took an awful lot from it. Charlie'd leave a book on my bed as he was passing my cell. I'd read it and think, Charlie Richardson read that book? It moved me to tears. It was a strange book. It was called, and I've given it to him since, and it was by a lady called Taylor Caldwell, and it was called The Listener. And it's basically about several people, one on a plane, a mother whose son wants to be a priest, another chap whose company's going under, and they all finish up going to this place and reading about the man who listens. And you never know who the listener is, but they go in there and they sit there like I'm talking to you. But from that book, or the books he gave me, took me into refer to that book. So that was an ongoing journey. You can imagine a man sitting in prison. It's the loneliest place in the world. 15 years, you're looking ahead, there's nothing. But the man told me if I threw my head over the wall, my body would follow. And it did. So thanks to Charlie, I got out of prison quite a few years before I did. Yeah, he did have a hard time in prison, yeah. But they didn't trust him, you understand what I'm saying? They thought he was too clever, he was too careful, he was too polite, he was too... You know, it couldn't be real. This is Charlie Richardson, the gangster, you understand? This is the torture boss. How can he be a decent guy? How can he be doing that? There's got to be a move in it. It's a picture he's painting. But it wasn't. That was just what Charlie was. He was okay. He could handle himself, yeah. But he didn't have to. Charlie didn't have to do it. But he didn't make anybody else do it. Charlie didn't create problems. Charlie was a clever man. He didn't like the system. He would always battle with the system. If something wasn't right, like Frankie Fraser, they were battlers against the system. You know, I'd say they were pretty solid people when they were in prison. You know, and I found both of them. I respected both of them there. Not because I feared them or anything else like that, but I respected them as men. They did their time the right way, maybe the hard way. I can remember a governor in Durham Ewing who turned around to Richardson, and we were complaining about the food. And because they felt that the sex cases who were above us on another level, we never saw them or anything, Brady and people like that, they were frightened that they were going to poison them and then maybe poison us as well, because the same kind of food, so they allowed us to cook our own food. So Charlie and I were the chefs. He said, we're not happy about the food, Governor. And he said, Richardson, what do you know about food? Charlie had been all over the world. He'd been to the States, he'd been to Africa, he'd been to kind of Canada, he'd been Italy, Spain, he'd done it all. But they had such an opinion of Charlie. What they don't understand, they fear. And they didn't understand Charlie. Because Charlie was the kind of person who really shouldn't have been in prison. Charlie was the kind of man they'd have loved if they'd met him out on the street. But because he finished up in their prison, the system was frightened of Charlie. Because of the torture, because of this, because of all the publicity that went before it. So they didn't want to know nothing about Charlie. They held him off there. And it wasn't easy for Charlie, especially with a young family. His kids were wonderful. They used to visit him on a regular basis. And that's where his heart was. And that's proved to be true, because 27 years later, and I go down on a regular basis and sit there with Charlie, we go out for a meal or whatever, his kids love him to death. They love him to pieces. They come and visit him regular, his grandchildren. And you go there and that's all he wants to talk about, his grandkids. He don't want to talk about crime and villainy and all the rest of it. But Charlie's a bit cynical about human nature because of that trial. And many things, they needed a conviction. They were going to get a conviction one way or the other. The same as the Krays. It was political. And they had to go down. Who's running London? We're running London. Not the Richardsons, not the Krays. They've got to be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, now Charlie Richardson's been out 27, 28 years. Same as myself. He's never gone back to prison. Eddie went back. Frank Fraser went back. Most of our peers went back. Charlie didn't, I didn't. Well, I don't know that she changed his life. I think that it was a marriage, kind of, if you say marriage is made in heaven. She takes care of Charlie, and Charlie takes care of her. Together they're solid, and they work well together. And I always enjoy their company. Whenever I go down, which is quite frequently, you know, I can sit with them two guys and really feel that I'm part of their family. And that's genuinely what I do feel. And I think she's a smashing lady and just right for Charlie. And I think he knows that as well, the old bugger. It depends from what way you're looking. I mean, all I see is a gentleman. I see a man that I spent many, many years, more or less 15 years in prison. Charlie and I were in Durham E-Wing together. We were in Leicester Security Wing together. We were in Gartree together. And we were in Maidstone together. So we're not talking about 5 minutes. We're talking about the best part of 15 years. We were in different prisons. I never see Charlie attack anybody. I never see him threaten anybody. All I ever see Charlie doing for people was good. That's what I saw, a decent human being. And if I'm anything today, and we're at a place where I worked, Charlie Richardson was part of my journey that brought me here, helping to save lives, helping to encourage people that there is a better way of life. Charlie Richardson brought a lot into me. He didn't even know he was doing it. It led to me because I took it literally. I had nothing else. All I had was a belief system that I believed tomorrow could be better, and it is better. I'm out of prison. I've been out 27 years. I've got a nice family. I worked at this place here. We're at the lay community now. This place is probably one of the most wonderful places that I've ever been in my life. When I came out of prison, I went and got straight jobs, but a lovely parole officer who really wanted the best for me. And he said, "You're wasted driving the JCB. He said, I want to take you around, maybe get you a job in a night shelter or something where you can help people." And finally, he brought me here. And you know, when you find a home, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's comfortable, it's everything, it's challenging. And this place has got all that. And my first job was to take a young guy as a volunteer to Epsom Crown Court. And I took him there and I got up in front of a judge, me getting up in front of a judge speaking on somebody else's behalf. And I said, this guy's done the condition of residence, he's done very, very well. And we're prepared to accept him back as a member of the community. And the judge gave him that condition of residence. On the way back, I was excited for him and pleased that I'd been able to do something positive. I may not live here, but my heart resides here. And I've got to tell you this little story. My brother Tony had done a deal with the News of the World. And the deal was that the News of the World were going to pay 50 grand to me and 50 grand to him if we could give him the story where Jack the Hat was buried. Of course, we don't know where Jack the Hat was buried, and neither did Tony. So Tony got in touch with me and said, "Look, I want you to meet the people from the News of the World, the editor and what have you." And so I did, and they put us into this hotel called the Strand Palace in London. And I sat in there and I thought, I've got a job I love at the lay community. I'm doing some good with my life. and I'm sitting in this room, or I've got Sky Television, but it's like a prison, and I don't want it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go. And the £50,000 is nothing if you lose everything. And I had a young family as well. So I went down for breakfast and I rang Tony and said, I need to see you because I'm not going to do it today. You know, we meant to do the interview today. And Tony come running over at the hotel and we had breakfast together, and he said, what's the matter with you? I said, I just don't want to do it, Tony. He said, 50 grand buys an awful lot of nappies. I said, yeah, but it's more than that, Tony. I don't want to lose what I've got. Money is nothing in comparison. Anyway, I said, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd like a lift to Victoria bus station. He said, if you can turn down 50 grand, you can bloody well walk. He did take me in the end, but that was, and I never missed it. It would have took me off in a different direction. You know, I'd have been everybody's friend for maybe a week or two, and then I'd have lost everything. So I stuck with what I was doing here and had 12 wonderful years and helped to save people, helped to be part of people's lives, and some lived and some died, and some were great successes and some not so great. But I had the most amazing time, really. This is somewhere very special. This is kind of almost saying holy ground, but there's something works here that I've never seen work anywhere else like it, really. But there is no time for regrets. I can look at my marriage. I had a young daughter and I really should have been a father to her, yet I chose the Krays over her in some respects. Because I could have said, yeah, I went to this party, I don't know what happened, but yes, I went back there and the man was dead, but I said, I know nothing. And so I've got to analyse it all and look back and think, well, what do I think? And I read a biblical verse and it said, the years which the locusts have eaten have been restored to me. I've had 27 wonderful years out of it. Seen children, been there when they've come into the world. I've gone through the heartbreak of divorce. I've seen my children grow up. I've stood there and watched my daughter graduate from university. I'm an East End boy, you understand what I'm saying? With very little education. Thank God I met Charlie Richardson because he helped to educate me. He was the teacher who gave me the time. He was the teacher who pointed me in the right direction. But there was one teacher before him, was an old teacher who taught me how to read, gave me the greatest gift ever. And that is it. Yeah, the years which the locusts have eaten have been restored to me. They had their 15 years, but before that, what was there? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Borstal, approved school, YP sentences, 2 years in the Verne Portland for blowing safes, all that kind of stuff. Culminated in getting life for a murder that I didn't commit. But at the end of the day, I'm free now, and I know how to value my freedom. I've got lovely kids. I've got wonderful, wonderful friends. But for 15 years, I sat in prison, and the only person to come and see me whilst I was there, God rest his soul, was my father. Everybody else abandoned me. I know what lonely is. I know what it is to feel you want to be close to people. No amount of money can give you that. No amount of money can give you the warmth and the feelings you get when you walk through your own front door. Peace of mind, you don't have to be looking over your shoulder because you're not doing anything wrong. You understand what I mean? It's always the right time to do the right thing. In any given situation, you have choices, right or wrong. Person comes here has a choice whether he wants to stay and change his life or to leave it and go back into hell and go around the same old circles, the same old situations, and finishing up with the same problems. That's life. I've got to tell you this. They take me to this restaurant, Italian restaurant. So I said to Charlie, well, it's my turn. It don't matter what you pay. If you're with somebody who has been as close to you as Charlie was, then money doesn't come into it. So we go to this restaurant, a little Italian restaurant down in Kent, and an old pub it is, so we're having a meal there. And so I thought, I'm going to go and pay the bill. So Charlie had lobster, my brother Jim had lobster, his wife had lobster, everybody had lobster, thermidor and all the rest of it. So I go and get the bill, but I don't look at it because I'm not bothered. I give my credit card and I sign it. So Charlie said, can I have the bill? And the waiter in Italian said, there is no bill. He said, he must know me, yeah? So I know I've paid it. So I said, no, well, yeah, might do, Charlie. So Jimmy said, you paid it? He said, Charlie said, well, let me go half. I said, no, I said, it's my pleasure to do something. You did a lot for me. I'm going to do something back for you. Don't matter what it costs. Anyway, on the way home, my brother Jim said, Chris, what it come to? I said, forget it. He said, show me. He looked and it was about 600 quid. With wine and all the rest of it. But it don't matter, you understand what I mean? To sit there with Charlie, chat and have a laugh and all the rest of it, it's priceless. You know, it goes back to craft work. Sitting in that, you know, in two chairs, travelling through Germany, taking me through South Africa. He knew the history of Africa. He knows about minerals, he knows about this. Ask him about torture and all that kind of thing. He ain't interested. It's not him. That's the real Charlie Richardson. The miner, you know, digging for something. I said, look, the twins have got this under control. All you got to do is stay still, stay quiet, and just go about your business like normal.
On the 8th of May 1968, Scotland Yard's finest took Ronnie and Reggie Kray into custody for the murders of George Cornell and Jack the Hat McVitie.
I was surrounded by police officers. Because they came in unmarked cars, I thought it was a firm. The firm had come to kill me.
Hi, I'm Nick from Underworld Uncut, and this week we're with Chris Lambrianou in the first of 3 unseen videos, looking at exactly what happened from the moment Nipper Reid rounded up the Krays and their firm.
That previous evening, we'd been to a party, and there'd been an argument there between Mickey Riley and Ronnie Kray, because Mickey Riley was Billy Hill's nephew, and there was something about, he felt we were doing something up in Leicestershire, and he felt that Mickey was trying to hold something back, and Charlie had already warned me not to tell the twins anything, because they would want the money before we even got to it. They were that kind of people, you understand? So anyway, there turned out to be a bit of an argument, and it finished up with Ronnie Kray and Charlie Kray fighting out on the cobbles, having a straightener. Not weapons or anything else, but just genuinely having a fight. And it all calmed down and they went back in. I can remember Reggie coming up to me and saying to me, I've heard all this rubbish about Reggie didn't consume his marriage and all that kind of thing. But let me tell you, I know different. Because I'd met a girl up in Birmingham. Her name was June. Very nice girl. Just very pretty, but, you know, wasn't gangsterish or anything else like that. And she came down to London with me, and we'd been together a couple of weeks, and she said to me, Chris, I've got something to tell you. I said, oh yeah. I said, what's that? She said, I'm kind of smitten by a member of the firm. So I ran all the different people off, Ronnie Bender, so-and-so, so-and-so. And I said, well, who is it then? And she said, it's your brother Tony. I hated him. But anyway, the thing was, she didn't kind of, I'm not going to stand in the way, you understand what I mean? She fancied Tony and that was it. And, you know, they had a meeting, but it didn't mean nothing. And so she's kind of at a loose edge, but still friendly with me. And Reggie Kray came up to me that night and he said, Chris, he said, June, he said, does she mean anything to you? So I said, no. I said, she's a friend. He said, so you wouldn't mind, he said, if I could speak to her? So I said, no, go ahead, you know what I mean? Just go and have a chat with her. Anyway, he said, I really don't know what to say. He was totally confused. He said, I've taken some speed and, you know, to loosen me up a bit, he said, and I'll go and talk to her. So anyway, he chats to her, and they finish up going back to his mother's flat. And so that night, or that morning, or very early in the morning, the police crash through the door. And she tells me what happens. They crash through the door, get Reggie out of bed, not too politely as it were, and they said to her, "Get out of bed, slag." And she said, "How dare you call me that?" They said, "Just get out of bed." She said, "But I haven't got no clothes on." And they said, "Well, still get out of bed because we don't know you haven't got a gun," or something like that. Anyway, she's protesting. They got her a dressing gown. She got herself dressed with a dressing gown. And they started tipping drawers out on the floor. Everything was being chucked everywhere. And she said, "Mr. Kray's going to be very annoyed when he comes back," because she was an innocent. And they turned around and said, "Mr. Kray's not coming back." And then she told me that the next day. She rang me at home and she said, "Like, Chris, this is what's happened." So right away, I didn't panic because it could have happened any time. You understand, from the blind beggar onwards, there was loads of reasons why they could have been nicked and wasn't. So I got, you know, concerned, not about them being away, but what people might have said. Different people were at different events. And plus I'm covering my own back as well and Tony's. So I got in touch with, I heard there were a couple of brothers called the Kaufmans, who were Americans, who were involved with the mafia. And they were a little bit concerned and their bottles were going a little bit. And I thought if they talked to the police, they'd crack. So I had to give some reassurance there. And then I went and talked to the Mills brothers, who were actually at the flat when McVitie was killed. And I said, "Look, the twins have got this under control. You know, there's been no problems and all that. Just all you got to do is stay stum, stay quiet, and just go about your business like normal." But what about, I said, "Don't worry about anything." And that was the reaction I got from everybody. And so I didn't have a lot of concern. I thought, you know, everything would remain staunch. I mean, this is a firm. They're together, they're organised, they don't do that kind of thing. It goes against everything we've ever been taught. I mean, we came up through approved schools, detention centres, borstals. If you've got Eton and you've got Harrow, we've got sort of Hollesley Bay, we've got Reading, we've got Kidlington, Campsfield House, you know, we've got young offenders institutions, we've got Wormwood Scrubs, we've got borstals, we've got everything. That's our history, the same as they've got their education, we've got ours. The one thing you learn in them institutions is you're only as good as what you do, and what you do is don't put anybody else in it. There's a set of principles and morals. Anyway, so I wasn't that frightened, I wasn't that worried. But what I did notice, there was, I noticed felt I was being followed because I was living up in Birmingham at the time. And two policemen were outside a nightclub, sitting in a car. So I needed to get to my car, which was on the car park. I'd come out the nightclub, and they're called the Elbow Room. And I walked up the telephone box and I rang the police station and said, "Excuse me, I've seen two police officers sitting in their car, seem to be joking, smoking and drinking. Shouldn't they be out on the street catching criminals?" And within a matter of minutes, they'd gone. So I was able to go and get my car and go on my way. But the other thing as well, I noticed that there was, wherever I went, if I went into the Cedar Club or I went to Johnny Prescott's club, there all seemed to be kind of dodgy people there. Dodgy people, by that I mean the police. And so I felt there was something coming. And I had a friend called Johnny Hunt, who was a car dealer in Birmingham. And I said to him, "John," I said, "when are you going over to Spain?" He said, "We can go on Monday." And this would have been Saturday. So I'm due to meet him and we're going to go over to Spain on the Monday. He'd had an argument with his wife and we couldn't make it. Now, that following weekend, I'd been to the Johnny Prescott's pub called the Ponderosa, and as I came out of there going down to the elbow room on the hill, I was surrounded by police officers. I'm going to be honest with you, because they came in unmarked cars, I thought it was a firm. The firm had come to kill me. But then when they showed their badges, some of them, I got the message that they were the police. But when I'm there, I'm beginning to think to myself, this is coming undone here. And I still felt that I wasn't safe. You know, out of hand, it was out of control. And that's what it got out of hand now. They took me to the police station in Birmingham. And whilst there was a number of detectives and what have you there playing darts. And they've got me handcuffed and what have you. And they're taking me to London. And the photograph they've got on the dartboard is Ronnie and Reggie Kray. They're firing darts into it. And I said, well, what's that going to do? You know, you're not frightening me. They said, no, but Mr. Reid will. So I get taken down to London. They brought me down to London and surprised me because they didn't take me to Scotland Yard. They took me to a place called Tintagel House, which is on the embankment. And I said, why aren't we going to Scotland Yard? So right away, my mind is confused. And the two police officers was Trevor Lloyd Hughes and Cater, Inspector Cater. And they took us up, about 4 or 5 policemen around as well, took us up in the Tintagel House. He said, tell us about McVitie. So I don't know what you're talking about. He said, oh, yes, you do. He said, you were there but left. He said, what happened? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. You tell me. He said, well, you went to the Regency Club, you met McVitie, and you went from the Regency Club down to Evering Road, to Blonde Carroll's flat, where there was an altercation and McVitie died. You wasn't there when it happened, but you were there when he went there. You actually went there with him. I said, Mr. Reid, I don't know anything you're talking about. As far as I'm concerned, it's a non-event. It didn't happen. Whoever's told you this. But he had so much detail that I knew he knew something. And what he knew was quite important. Anyway, he said, look, what I'm going to say to you now is we're going to let you go and I'm going to give you my card and I want you to go away and think. He said, and give me a call. And I promise you that neither you nor any of your family will suffer any inconsequence over this. We will support you. We will protect you. Just tell us what happened. I can't say nothing. I cannot say a word because it's the culture I've came up with. I don't know anything else. And all I wanted to do was get out of the East End. I wanted to get out. I wanted to get enough money to live a straight life. That's basically what I wanted. I wanted what everybody else had. I couldn't get a job due to my criminal past. What I wanted was freedom. The only freedom I'd get was if I had enough money to acquire it and go straight. Because I knew crime didn't pay, really. And so he gave me his card and he let me go. I made my way back home and I spoke to Tony and I spoke to other people because now it's got very serious. But I also went and saw, big mistake on my part, I went and saw Violet Kray and Reggie's girlfriend, Carol. And I explained what happened. I've got Violet Kray and Carol turning around and saying to me, Chris, you've got to let the twins know. You've got to let the twins know what's happened. Now, it was against everything that I thought, you know, was right, but I'm listening to a mother. I lost my mother. My mother would have said the same thing to Reggie or Ronnie Kray. You've got to go and let Chris know about this. So I went up to Brixton with them that afternoon, signed myself in as Mickey Mouse, because that's what you could do in them days. I mean, there weren't security like there is today. And went in, and the minute I walked into that visiting room, they were behind glass and with a little speaker thing underneath and everything. And Charlie Kray went to me like that. You shouldn't be here, Chris. Bad move. But Ronnie and Reggie, hello Chris, how you going? Nice to see you. How's everything out there? What's happening? And I said, it's not good. It's bad. What do you mean? I said, well, you know, Nipper Reid has brought me down, or their firm have brought me down. They know all about the McVitie and so on and so and so and all that. Keep stum. Don't say nothing. We've got it under control. Have you got a lawyer? We'll sort a lawyer out. Then I go and speak to, because Reggie was in one cubicle and Ronnie was in another. So I speak to them both, tell them what's happened. They both tell me a lawyer will be sorted out. So don't worry about that. So say our goodbyes, thanks for coming up, loyal and all the rest of it, and away I'll go. And I said to Violet, I said, that wasn't a good move on my part. But you let the boys know, at least they're not in the dark. Anyway, I go and get hold of different people again and tell them that I've been brought down, you've got to stay sound, you've got to stay loyal and all the rest of it. Little did I know the firm was crumbling underneath. So I'm home about maybe 5 weeks. And I was in Birmingham once again. They came up, they took me, kicked the door in of the house where I was staying. They came down, brought me down to London, to Tintangel House, and I'm sitting there. Nipper Reid says, I'm giving you this chance once again. I did tell you that your family or yourself would not be in any trouble. Just tell me the truth. I know you weren't there, but you were there at the beginning. Tell me about it. I said, I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Reid. And I was polite. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. It's a non-event. I don't know who you're listening to. He said, who I'm listening to? I'm listening to him. I'm listening to him. I'm listening to him. He said, the firm has gone the other way. He said, and why are you holding out? He said, you don't owe them nothing. And I said, well, I still don't know what you're talking about. And in frustration, he was playing around with a gun on the table or on the desk. He ran round and smashed me over the head with it. And I knew then that the bottom line was that he would, you know, he was in a rage with me. I was what he wanted. I wasn't involved directly. I was more involved in the scene up north, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Blackpool. I was involved around there. I certainly weren't involved in anything in London. Anyway, Tony was, but not me. Anyway, and he had somebody who he felt would stand up in the dock against the Krays, and I weren't doing that. And he said to Kate, he said, charge him, he said. He wants to be on their side. He said, well, he'll get the same results as them. You're going down. I gave you a chance. And, you know, he did give me a chance. He didn't really want to nick me. I know that. To this day, I know he didn't want to nick me. He wanted me because the credibility of his witnesses was so damaged. Each one of them had been steeped in crime and all that kind of thing, and they were really saving their own bacon, you know, and they're very questionable witnesses. But he felt I was not that involved, so I would have made a more credible witness. And so the thing was, they charged me with murder. I was taken to Bow Street Magistrates Court and put in a cell. And then I heard somebody speak in the next cell. And I realised it was my brother Tony. And I shouted out through the hatch, Tony, is that you? And Tony said, yeah, Chris. He said, I said, who else? He said, Ronnie Bender's next door. And they'd done Ronnie Bender, Tony and myself. And they charged us all with murder. We finish up at Bow Street the next day, and we're all remanded in custody. But still we feel we're safe, you know. And I said to Ronnie Bender, Ronnie, please, I said, don't, because he thought, I've got a family, I've got kids, I've got all that kind of thing. And it's my loyalty to the Underworld. And really, he didn't owe the Underworld anything, really. I mean, he was a regular soldier, an all-round good sportsman, decent guy, you know what I mean, kind-hearted. And in some respects, I feel sorrowful because I made him, well, I didn't make him, but I asked him to trust the Krays. And on that trust, he went down. And so we the three of us are there, and we get then remanded in custody. Me and Ronnie Bender are taken to Wandsworth prison and put in the hospital wing because we're charged with murder. And Tony went to Brixton because Brixton then had become full and it was done on the numbers. Anyway, there was interviews, there was all that kind of stuff, but we still wouldn't say nothing. And then we were given a trial date, and then somehow or other we got caught up in the legal thing where the first lawyer to come and see us was the twins' lawyer. But that was a cute move on their part, because then they would know everything that was being said. Well, I didn't have an objection to having their lawyer, Ralph Himes it was. And Ralph wasn't a bad boy. He weren't a bad man. But the bottom line was everything we said he was feeding back to them. And it was all one-way traffic, really. My view was, let's stick with it. They know what they're doing. They can be trusted. Let's go with that. So the outcome of that was we now begin to get the depositions coming through with regard to what evidence they've actually got. And it was mind-blowing because the evidence they got was Albert Donoghue, who was one of their top enforcers. And I would never in a million years have imagined that somebody with his character and knowing the Underworld as he did would actually give Queen's evidence. But there again, I analysed it and thought, well, they did shoot him at one time when he was with another firm. Maybe this was retribution after many years. But then I thought to myself, no, this is beyond this. He's really looked at his life, and it's not about the Krays, it's about his family. And maybe that's the reason he's done it. And then the next witnesses were the Mills family. Both brothers, Ray and Alan Mills, gave evidence. They were two innocents as well, in that they had a criminal background, but still they gave evidence. Why? Once again, they didn't do nothing. They were invited to a party by me and Tony, and we genuinely thought it was a party, which turned out all wrong. It was never meant to happen. The McVitie murder was never meant to happen. It was something that snowballed into murder. I've got to get the body, put it over my shoulder and throw it over the railway bridge so that the body gets mashed up.
On the 29th of October 1967, Kray associate Chris Lambrianou, his brother Tony and countless other firm members attended a party with the Krays in Stoke Newington, London.
This thing about putting a body in a boot is ridiculous. We put him on the back seat because you'd never fitted him in the boot of the car.
Hi, I'm Nick from Underworld Uncut, and this week we're back with Chris Lambrianou to find out the truth about the real-life events that put him and 8 others, including Ronnie and Reggie Kray, behind bars for a combined total of over 110 years.
You know, it started out as an argument, it went from an argument to threats, and it went to a bit of a fight. It went to Jack trying to escape, and Ronnie Hart, the cousin, going getting a knife from out the kitchen and putting it into Reggie Kray's hands, and then saying, kill him. And that their own cousin did that. And he was another one that I never felt would give evidence against the Krays, their own cousin. And yet his deposition said he was giving evidence as well, and it was damning evidence. What happened was we went to the Regency Club. Prior to that, we'd met up it was Violet's birthday, and we all met together in a pub in Valence Road, and we were having a drink and saying hello and all the rest of it. And Tony insisted upon going to Regency afterwards. And I said, don't, I want to go to the West End. There's the best cellar down there. We can have a drink, there's plenty of birds and all the rest of it. Let's go down there. And Tony said, well, no, let's go to the Regency because the Mills have never been there. And you know, show them around. But I said, don't go to the Regency, it's Saturday night gangsters there. Which it was, they'd all get dressed up and like want to be the hard man and all the rest of it. So it was, you avoided it on a Saturday night. It's trouble, you didn't need it. But anyway, the outcome was we went and Jack turned up. Hello, how you going? Shaking hands with different people. And so we went to the there was general invitation to a party. We all piled into Jack's car and we went over to the Ebbing Road. We go in, we go downstairs, we have a drink, and then an argument starts between Reggie and Jack McVitie. Reggie pulls a gun out, he pulls the trigger, but it don't work. So to me, it looks like it's a bluff. And I turned around to Connie Whitehead, I said, Connie, I don't want this. I didn't come down here for this. I came down here, I thought it was a party. I'm out of here. Anyway, Ronnie Kray came out and said, what's the problem? And said, Chris is a bit drunk, he wants to go home. He said, we'll take him home. So Connie Whitehead drove me back to my dad's house in Queensbridge Road, which was about a couple of miles away. And I went in, I sat there, I was talking to my dad, and I began to think about Tony back there. I thought, you know, sobered up a little bit. So I had a gun in there, so I went and got this Webley automatic pistol, and I went back to get Tony out of there. So I'm thinking, you know, if they ever hurt Tony, I'm going to use this gun. If you've got a gun in your hand, you're not frightened. And I had used one before, so I knew exactly what I was doing. And when I got there, I knocked at the door. Ronnie Bender came to the door, and I said, Ronnie, is Tony down there? He said, no, he's gone. So I went to turn away. He said, don't go. I said, what do you mean, Ron? He went, don't go. He said, they've killed him. I went, get out of it. Killed him? I said, what, in front of all them people? He said, yeah. He said, they've done him. I said, no. I said, where is he? He said, downstairs. I thought, God. I said, look, Ronnie, I don't. He said, please. I said, what's your instructions? He said, I've got to get the body, put it over my shoulder. He's on his own, mind you. I've got to take it 100 yards up the bridge on the Ebbing Road and throw it over the railway bridge so the body gets mashed up. He said, and there's no evidence. It's all scattered everywhere. I said, where are they? He said, well, they've run away. He said, they've gone. He said, help me. So I did. That was my downfall. I went in. I'd been a burglar in my time. I went and got some socks out of the kitchen where Ron Carroll had been washing socks. We got cleaning stuff. We cleaned the whole place up, the fireplace, and there was his body laying there. And now we've got to move that body. And in the meantime, Tony had come back to find me. So Tony gets involved as well. So it's 3 of us down there. We don't know what instructions we've got, but he certainly ain't going to go over no railway bridge. And certainly nobody's going to carry him, because across the road from Blonde Carroll's flat used to be a bagel shop where all the taxi drivers used to go there any time through the day or night to get their break, you know, their bagels and that. So they would have actually seen everything that was happening. So what I did, I went upstairs into the children's bedroom and I took an eider down off of Blonde Carroll's bed, and we put Jack in that, wrapped him up, and then all the blood and everything else that was around, I had a bucket with a kind of a sponge and whatever. I was cleaning all that up. I've got a bucket full of blood and I'm taking it up the stairs, and Blonde Carroll came in and she went, oh, Chris, what are you doing here? I said, there'd been a bit of a party, I said, and an argument. I said, needs a bit of tidying up. You and George get off to bed and we'll sort it out, and everything will be tidy by the morning when you come down. She said, what about the children? Are they okay? And she said, well, I said, we've not heard nothing. What I didn't know, there were 2 babies upstairs in the bed, which the Krays were supposed to be looking after. So she's gone into the room. I've emptied the bucket of blood. I've gone back downstairs, made sure everything's tidy. We've washed up. We did a very, very good job. Such a good job that Bruce Reynolds said, I wish we'd had you working on our firm. And so we then have to physically get the body and take it up to the hallway of the house and lay it there so we can see everything's outside. And then we get McVitie's body and put it in the car. This thing about putting a body in a boot is ridiculous. We put him on the back seat because you'd never fitted him in the boot of the car. And then there's an argument about who is going to drive the body, because we've come to the conclusion we put it over the other side of the water on Richardson territory. So if it came undone, it would go on them people. Bender said, I'm not driving it. No way. And Tony said, well, I'll drive it, which I thought it was very brave of him. I couldn't do it because I was actually driving my own car. So then Bender and I get in my car. Remember, I've got a gun with me. And Tony drives the body over the water. And we're following him. When we get along by Mare Street, like Clapton, a police car falls in behind Tony. It came that close to being a Harry Roberts scenario. I can't let them take Tony with a body. So I'm going to use that gun. Now, can you understand the fatalities that could have happened from the time that the Krays lost control, or Reggie lost control, and was given that knife by Ronnie Hart? If there's a comedy of errors, there's also a tragedy of errors. And that was the tragedy of errors. It just cascaded down. Everything fell down. And you know, from his one act, policemen could have died, people could have got involved. We took it over the water. What we didn't realise was that Freddie Foreman, it could have fallen on his patch. So when the car runs out of petrol outside a church, where there'd been a wedding that day, because all the confetti was on the ground, the body was left in the car there. We dropped Ronnie Bender back at Charlie Krays' flat, and we go home, and Tony and I are then talking about what's got to happen, because we've got to safeguard ourselves. Ronnie Bender told him what happened, and thinking he'd done right, and Charlie Kray went mad. And then the twins got involved. They got mad as well because they wanted it put over the railway bridge, but we went against everything they said and actually put it over across the water. Now, the bottom line is, Freddie Foreman, him, has to get involved because he's got to move the body. Or him and Charlie. Well, that's what they were accused of. Whether that happened, I don't know. But the body was never ever found. It's never been found to this day. So that is the circumstances. Total chaos. They've gone off to wherever they've gone to. I think it was Suffolk, a house down in Suffolk, to clear themselves. We're left with a body that we've got to dispose of in some way, and it's just pure craziness. I just thought it'd be like the trials I'd stood before. You know, I'd been in front of judges before, and they took you up in a van, and that was it. But this was so much different. The driver of the van was named Fred, and he introduced us all. Introduced himself to each one of us, and it was all, you know, and police outriders, police cars at the back and front. I know the Richardson trial was big and the train robbery trial was big, but this was even bigger. And what they'd done was very cunningly took us all to the Old Bailey, and the first thing they did, Judge Melford Stevenson, who was known as a very reactionary judge, he decided that we were all to put a cardboard thing round our neck with a number on it, so we would be identified. I felt we were being treated like animals, you know, and I ripped my one up and chucked it down, and then everybody else did the same. And I'm not saying that because it makes me any better than anybody else, but, you know, all your life people are kind of judging you. They're putting a number on you, and I resented numbers. So that's what I felt I was doing. But everybody else did the same, just chucked it down the well of the court. And they never tried to put numbers on us again. But then there were kind of submissions. And one of the submissions was, it had never been done before, and there was no such thing as joint enterprise. There was accessory before the fact, there was accessory a murder, and there was accessory after the fact, or manslaughter, whatever you want to call it. So the submission was, these two brothers had both been charged with murder. The George Cornell murder, and there was the McVitie murder, where several of us were charged. Myself, Tony, Connie Whitehead, Ronnie Bender, one of the Barry brothers. There was Reggie and Ronnie, Freddie Foreman and Charlie. Freddie Foreman and Charlie, accessory after the fact. Us charged with accessory before the fact, or murder. So what they said was, because it was alleged, and I never heard that, I've done mine, you do yours, they were able to join up the two murders together. They joined the two trials together. It's been the first time in history they ever did it, and I don't think they've ever done it since, where they've joined up two murder trials together. Because normally the Cornell murder would have stood on its own, and it would have had no impactment on the McVitie murder, or the McVitie murder would not have had any impact on the people involved in the Cornell murder. But they joined them both together, and that's the way the trial went. So we've got this trial, and I had said to both Reggie and Ronnie, look, you got one of your main witnesses you've got is Ronnie Hart, who alleged that he gave you the knife which killed Jack the Hat McVitie. I'm going to suggest to you that, in actual fact, he was the one who killed Jack the Hat McVitie and not you. Can we not say we went to a party, there was an argument, and he went and got a knife and killed McVitie without anybody's knowledge? They wouldn't have that. All they said was it didn't happen, that no party ever took place, and that's the line we had to take. So we did. Ronnie Bender, Tony, myself, we went through the longest murder trial in criminal history at that time, with not even being able to defend ourselves. Although she could give evidence, or previously, you know, give a statement that she never knew what had happened, from the moment she got in the dock, we were finished. Now, you've got to remember, that was on the Cornell case. The people on the McVitie case were wasters. People involved in crime, steeped in crime history, been involved in murders and everything else like that, and are standing up and giving evidence with not one thing happening to them. They're not going down. John Dixon, Albert Donoghue, the Mills brothers, Ronnie Hart, Leslie Payne. You've got all these people all getting up and giving evidence. But the bottom line was, because them two trials were put together, the evidence from the barmaid, I'm absolutely 100% certain, condemned every one of us. No, they didn't. They had a certain arrogance about them. What I felt was, you know, we'd lost it. I mean, when we came down from the what's-her-name, they'd be, you know, because you'd be tense and all that kind of thing, they'd be massaging your neck and all the rest of it. You understand what I'm saying? Are you all right, Chris? You know, you okay? Cool. And all that kind of thing. You know, this is, you know, they ain't got nothing against us. We're all going to walk out of this. Ronnie, you okay? You know what I mean? Pulling the shoulders back like we were fighters. You know when you go into the corner in a boxing match and they kind of give you the massage and stuff like that? It was like that. We were ready for another round. And then in the public gallery, you had people who were stars at the time. Like there was Richard Green, who played Robin Hood. You had other people there that were kind of Lita Rosa. You had who was a top singer at the time. You had all these different characters coming in, and MPs that I don't know the names of. You had and the gallery was always full. Not only was that, there was the gallery upstairs that was always full. And I can remember the press getting hold of my dad one day and saying, can we talk to you about your sons? And old Charlie Kray, he turned round and he said, leave that man alone. Do you not think he's gone through enough? Because my dad was a dead straight man. Honest, decent man. All my dad ever wanted to be was a decent citizen. You know, he didn't have a criminal thought in his mind. The fact that his sons were brought up in the East End, he lost us. You know, he was a man who didn't really speak perfect English. He spoke with broken English. His values were from another country. His values was philosophers. You know, and he was a man who did try his very best and never deserted me ever. Not through all my criminal enterprises. You know, he didn't agree with what I'd done. But can I tell you a little story about my dad? I came home drunk one day, pal of mine, Johnny Westbrook, we'd been out drinking at a nightclub over in Westbourne Grove, and he dropped me off home. And I got out of the car, and I was literally on my knees, crawling up to the door and banging the knocker, and he opened the door. And he looked at me, he said, "Are you ashamed?" He said, "Look at you." He said, "You're like an animal. Look." He said, "Is this my son? Because I don't recognise this person, this thing." And I got so angry with him that somehow I got to my feet and I grabbed him by the shirt and I put him up against the wall, and as God is my judge, I pulled my hand back to hit him, but an angel got hold of my arm. And I'll always thank that angel, because when I was away doing all that time, all your friends desert you. You got nobody, you're on your own. But I had an angel. The angel that I nearly damaged. So you live with remorse. You live with sadness. My dad died when I was in prison, but he saw me to the very end. You know, maybe a year before I actually got out of prison. And I think I've become the man he was. Today I'm him. You know, despite what everybody else is saying, and you're listening to lawyers trying to build you up and all the rest of it, in your heart you know the truth. She just spoke it. And so we get found guilty. Jury stands up. But we were all taken up in the dock one at a time. We weren't all there together. You know, how do you find these men? It was, how do you find this man? Individually, we all, you know, got up and took it. And we'd come down and, how'd you get on, Chris? Guilty. And the twins would give you a hug, you know what I mean? Don't worry, we're going to sort this out and all the rest of it. Tony the same, Ronnie Bender the same, Connie Whitehead. So everybody, you know, they're hugging everybody that's coming down that have been on their side, have remained staunch. They then take us back to prison to come back and receive our sentences. Ronnie went up 30 years. Ronnie Bender went up, life and a recommendation of 20 years. He should never have got it, Ronnie Bender. He should never have got life in 20 years. But because he was a joker, he was a guy, a fun kind of guy. He would see the funny side of everything. And he often would lift people's spirits when they were down. And that's what he would do in the dock. And he got an extra 5 years for that, because Stevenson thought he was taking the mickey. It was just Ronnie being Ronnie. And in prison they called him the captain, because he was such a good footballer. He'd be the captain of every team. But he could lift people. He had that gift of lifting people. And for that he got an extra 5 years, which was sad really, because he had a lovely wife who waited for him and 3 young boys who needed their dad. You know, there's so much sadness in the Krays story. And so he's gone up, he's come down with 20. Ian Barry went up, he came down with life and 20. And then I went up and life and 15. Tony went up, life and 15. Connie Whitehead went up and he got 7 years. Freddie Foreman went up and got 10. Charlie Kray went up and got 10 years. Charlie had no involvement, put on the spot. Freddie Foreman is sitting at home doing whatever he's doing. He doesn't know what's going on. He's been told something's been left on his doorstep. So it's all gone totally. There was no organisation. Nothing was professional. Nothing was a criminal enterprise. This just was total chaos. Madness that cost everybody so much. Now, you want to ask me about the effects once you leave, once you've got sentenced. You're looking at 15 years. You're not looking at a remand in custody for 2 weeks. Well, you're 1 day into it. They may take into consideration the time you spent on remand, but they're not going to take into consideration the time you spent on remand, because you've got an indeterminate sentence, which is it's forever. What am I going to say to my wife? What am I going to say to my family? You're totally cast adrift on a sea of emptiness, and you're never going to maybe reach the final, your final destination. You don't think about a final destination. You think about one day at a time in a very dangerous world where life has no value, and everybody, the crime is bigger and better. And what you in for? I'm in for a bank robbery, but they're in for something so petty as maybe kind of robbing somebody's house or something else like that. It's a world of nothing. I don't care whether we live or die. I've got nothing to lose.
Following a 39-day hearing at the Old Bailey on the 5th of March 1969, Judge Melford Stevenson sentenced Ronnie and Reggie Kray to 30 years each, the longest sentence ever passed for murder at the time.
He was fearless, Ronnie, and he said to me, "We should just wrap dynamite around me. I'd just light the fuse and I'll take them all out with me." And he meant it.
Hi, I'm Nick from Underworld Uncut, and this week we're concluding our Chris Lambrianou series with recollections of the firm's many years spent in prison.
I was in Durham E-Wing, and the story of Durham E-Wing is very interesting because they came very early in the morning, and there's a story here because I'd had an argument with somebody. Somebody was bullying Connie Whitehead, and David Fraser was my next door neighbour in prison. And I finished up having this guy because he knew somebody was vulnerable and he was attacking Connie, and I knew Connie could have ate him alive but didn't, you understand? And I finished up giving the guy a smack to stop it happening. And so the very next morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, they came and got us. There was myself, there was Ronnie Bender, there was my brother Tony, there was Ronnie Kray, and there was Ian, 5 of us. And you've got this escort. We don't know where we're going. All we know, we've been told to pack our prison kit. We've got no externals. We've got nothing that we've brought into prison with us. All we've got is prison kit. So to move each one of us, they've got to have 2 dogs and 4 screws. So the first one goes out, which I think it was Ronnie Bender, who gets in a car, and he's got a screw on either side. He's got 2 screws in front with the driver. The next one out was me, and I looked out and I saw Nipperee, Cater, Lloyd Hughes, all the police officers, all standing on the lawn at Wandsworth Prison. And I looked and I thought, God, this is different than anything I've ever experienced before. And so then another 4 come out. So we all get into the cars. So there was a cavalcade. And there's motorcycle outriders, and there's a car in front and a car behind. And we're going up the motorway, and there's a helicopter above. But strangely enough, as we're going along the M1, we don't know where we're going. It could be absolutely anywhere. So as we're going along, one of these cars hits a bollard, because I suppose he was concentrating, looking at the cavalcade behind and all the rest of it. The bollard's gone up in the air and smashed down on the bonnet of another car. So the cars have like concertinaed. The screw beside me, he's gone, "We're going to be killed, we're going to be..." I said, "Shut up, because I don't care whether we live or die. I've got nothing to lose." I said, "We're not going to die." I said, "You're still alive, you're still here, just remain calm." I'm telling him, the other one on the other side, "He's right." I said, "No, he's not right. Calm down." Anyway, before I knew it, you've got this part of the motorway, there's hills. You're going between hills. There were armed police officers with rifles came, and they were standing along the ridges. You had helicopter overhead, and within a matter of, I'd say, even minutes, there were new police cars there to take us up to Durham, and they left the broken ones or the damaged ones there. When we get up to Durham, the chief constable said these people were so dangerous that if they needed to or wanted to, they could get a chieftain tank and push it through the wall of Durham prison and get these people out. So what we were done, we were confined to a wing of maybe 10, 12 cells, and in them 10 or 12 cells was Bruce Reynolds, the train robber, Joe Martin, bank robber. There was Tony Dunford. There was my Tony. There was Ronnie Bender, Ronnie Kray, myself and Ian Barry. That was us all together. And that's how it remained for about maybe 6 or 7 months. If you went on exercise, there was a cage, a literal cage, where, because there was only 7 of you on that wing, you were considered to be the most dangerous men within the system. And the only way they could control you is having this unit, small unit. There were 3 units. There was Durham E-Wing, there was Leicester Security Wing, which is known as a submarine, and there was Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight. They were the 3 top security wings. And so, you know, we would be there. They had padded cells there and everything, you know. All we looked at, this is the way they judge us. This is the way they see us, that we are the most dangerous people. You didn't feel like the most dangerous because you're still ordinary inside. You still, you know, you weren't 24/7 a criminal. You were also somebody who went in the shop and bought a packet of cigarettes. You were somebody who went and bought bread and milk if you needed it. You were ordinary. So that's what you reverted back to. There was, what did I have to prove to Ronnie Kray? What did I have to prove to Ronnie Bender or Tony? All these people knew me. Bruce Reynolds, he was a train robber. Now he's like us. He's got all the same fears and anxiety. He might lose his family. He loves his son. He loves his wife. You know, he's had some times out there, but he's looking back and he's also thinking, was it worth it? Ronnie went to Broadmoor, and that was evident because he was on a thing called Stemisol. And when he didn't have Stemisol, he was out of control. It's like when you had the bottle in your hand, you could control it, you could do stuff with it. But when the bottle went on the floor, it turned into a snake, and that was the way you know, Ronnie was. He was a very dangerous man when he didn't have it, and you knew when he didn't have it. Where Reggie didn't need that kind of medication. Reggie occasionally took a bit of speed, but that was more to front things up. He had more of a business brain. He'd think about earning money and all that kind of thing. Ronnie had that thing, he had to have it now. He had to buy a Waltham watch, he had to buy a Rolex watch, he had to do this, he had to do that. And that was the difference. But one was quiet, but the other one, when he didn't, you know, when he needed money to go and live the kind of lifestyle he wanted. But both of them had found this house down in Suffolk, and they had this plan to go straight and to go down there and retire. It was never going to happen. They were never going to make that. You know, they could have made it. They could have been very rich people. And I often wondered why they didn't, you know, go to somewhere like the Hilton and have a boardroom up there where people could sit down and exchange ideas and all the rest of it. But that wasn't the way they thought. They were very old-fashioned in their way. They liked the old pubs. And if you ever wanted to see the twins, you'd go into the Widow's pub, and there'd be an old tramp there, and you'd be going suited and booted, and the old tramp would say, "You looking for Reggie and Ronnie?" And you go, "Yeah, got to meet with them." "What's your name?" And you tell them, and they'd say, tell you where they were. You know, they were never where you expected them to be. They were somewhere else. And they had these tramps in different places. Poor people who would be there and advise you where to go and all the rest of it. And that's just the way they were. Incredible people in the way that I've never met anybody like them, to be honest. It was just the way they were. Like, if a snail's got a shell, you know, or a tortoise or anything else like that, they had that shell over them. And they peeked out and looked around, but people wouldn't let them be normal. They wanted Reggie and Ronnie. No, I think that, to be honest with you, I think that possibly if Ronnie had gone to prison, I think that Reggie would have straightened himself up, because he'd have come under the influence of different people and not under the influence of Ronnie. I think Ronnie didn't come under anybody's influence, because I'll give you one instance. The Glasgow firm had said they were going to have Ronnie over. And Ronnie got on a train and went up to Glasgow, and they met him off the train and took him to a house, and he sat there with them. He said, well, I think we've got problems, haven't we? And they turned around, the man like, with your bottle, no, we ain't got no problems. They could not believe that he could have the front to go and face them, because there were kind of some naughty people living up in Scotland at the time. There was Arthur Thompson, who often came down to London. I met him down there quite a few times, and there were Scottish faces, but they admired him for his courage and guts to go up there and face them, because he went into the unknown. He was fearless, Ronnie, and there was a rumour going round that somebody was going to try and kill Reggie. And he said to me, well, if ever they try that on, he said, I should just wrap dynamite around me and I'd just light the fuse and I'll take them all out with me. And he meant it. It was beyond a love affair. It was spiritual between the two of them. You know, I just think that Reggie without Ronnie wouldn't have been whole. And I think that, you know, Ronnie without Reggie wouldn't have been whole. And I think splitting them up, Reggie in prison and Ronnie in Broadmoor, didn't do any of them any good. But it couldn't be any other way, unfortunately, because the difference in the two, you understand, Ronnie was mentally unstable and Reggie was so full of grief. His dreams and his hopes, and I think they all died, really, when Francis died. I was in my cell this day, and Charlie Richardson was in the next cell, and we used to have a chat every day, give me books and stuff like that, and I'd give him them. And this day he said to me, Chris, I need to come and have a chat. And I said, no, Charlie, I want to be on my own. And laying there thinking, I thought about who could cry a tear for all the people in this jail. It's Maidstone Jail at the time, just one tear. And then I began to think about the effects prison has. It's like a tide that goes out, and it affects everybody. It affects families, it affects friends, it affects communities, it affects everybody. It affects school, it affects the children from that age to that age. It is so destructive. And I had chosen that over my wife and my child. And that was very hard to bear. No, they didn't have a family like that. They didn't have a wife and a child. My little girl, she came up to visit me, and she tried to take the keys off the prison officer and give them to me. She was only about 18 months old, just learning to walk. And then I never saw her for many years afterwards. You know, it was just because I could not. My wife wouldn't let her come up. My wife decided she couldn't cope with it. Just finished. That was her and I, you know. And then I went through the Royal Courts of Justice to try and get access, and I stood up in front of Justice Lane and I told her, I said, you did not make me a father. A greater hand than yours made me a father. And I want to be that, but you're going to stop me. And she had this right opinion of me, like, you know, I'm a common criminal, all the rest of it, really bad lot. But when she heard me speak, her voice quietened down and she kind of talked to me. And she said, Mr. Lambrianou, let me tell you this. Your daughter's going to need a great deal of help. It would be advisable if she could talk to a child psychologist, because to deal with something of this magnitude and the criminal, you know, background to your case and everything else like that, I can't allow you access because it'd be too damaging for her. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to allow you 1 letter a year and also a current photograph. And my wife sent me 1 letter and 1 photograph, but she felt so uncomfortable doing that. I could sense that. I sent her a letter and freed her from it. And I never got anything else. And the story ends there because during the time they were making the Kray film for Uncut Classic, Charlie Kray and my brother Tony went into the offices in Wardour Street, and my daughter was working there as a secretary. And she said, I think you know my dad. And Charlie Kray said, oh yeah, another one. And she said, no, it's Chris Lambrianou. And he said, would you like to meet him? And she said, yeah, I would very much. I've been searching for him. She's 19 years of age. And I arranged to meet her down at Marylebone Station. And Tony brought her along in his car. And I bought a massive big bunch of flowers and I met her. And Tony said, where do you want to go? I said, I want to go to the Serpentine. He said, what do you want to go to the Serpentine for? I said, I just want to go there, Tony, take me. And we went there. And he said, well, I'm going, I'll see you later. And I got a boat and rode out into the middle of the Serpentine. And I just talked to her. I wanted to be away from the world. I wanted just her alone. But going back to prison, we then were put into, we went to Leicester Security Wing, where once again there was the train robbers, Freddie Foreman, myself, Tony, Ronnie Bender, and that was about 9 of us kept in this unit, once again with a cage where we used to exercise. We were not part of the normal prison system. There was a bulletproof glass, you know, that they looked through at us, and everything was kind of, the screws would come round, unlock the door, you go out and exercise. There was no work, there was nothing to do. You were just dying inside, dying of boredom. So a lot of us, you know, got into books, got into literature. And I remember Charlie Rich was down there. And I got to know Charlie Richardson, and I liked the man. I never saw a violent man or even a dangerous man. What I saw was a man fighting his own battles, but a man who was striving to get educated. And Bruce Reynolds was the same. And them two guys between them, I remember Bruce Reynolds saying to me, he said, Chris, he said, watch what the clever ones are doing and do likewise. And the clever ones weren't acting tough and gangsterish and all the rest of it, or robbing. They were reading. They were getting into literature. They were going along to studies and things like that. And the Charlie would give you a book. He'd tell you a story. He was a compassionate man, and I learnt so much from him, so much about going straight. Hence, he was part of my 32 years out on the street. You know, if I hadn't have met Charlie and picked up on some of the things, the books he told me to read and stuff like that, he was an educator. And he did probably a lot more for me than the system did. But the system only saw Charlie as this dangerous gangster, puller out of teeth or electrodes and all the rest of it. There weren't Charlie Richardson I knew. Well, I mean, I'd met John Pearson before he ever wrote the book, The Profession of Violence. And to me, I'm being honest with you, it was a load of tosh. It really was. I mean, it was a psychological book about the Krays. I mean, Ronnie Kray used to laugh about it, but John Pearson, he put him up in a flat in the East End. And he complained to Ronnie that he had cold water. And the bed was hard and so on and so forth. And Ronnie, he said, can you move me? And Ronnie Kray said, no. You wanted to know what it's like in the East End? It's like that. There is damp. There is cold water. You won't have a bath when you want one. Otherwise you get a tin bath out and you have it in that. You know, you want to experience it, experience it. So, yeah, I mean, there was that. But then the other books came out as well. And it was a world, it wasn't like I knew it, you understand? It was, a lot of it was fantasy. I mean, you've got so many books out now that people have writ, but didn't even know them. You've got people, I brought down the Krays. No, you didn't bring down the Krays. The Krays were brought down by their own firm or brought down by the barmaid. And if anybody, I'd say the barmaid brought them down. And the system brought them down. You know, because the system, apparently, from what I'm hearing, a lot of the evidence they had, they should have given to the prosecution. They didn't give it. So, in that case, believe me, and I will say this now and forever, that was political. That came down from above. The minute they got involved with Boothby and Dryburgh and all them kind of people, they had to be brought down, and that was the order of the day. And anybody who was around, connected to them in any way, was going down as well, for good or bad. And that's the way I saw it. I think what they did, they got money out of, they ran charities and stuff like that. Money was raised. They had evenings where people would raise money for them and all the rest of it. And I think they got their money that way. They got money out of the film, which was quickly spent. I mean, I believe that Ronnie's bar bill in Broadmoor was something like $7,000. Now, you can look at me in shock, but in actual fact, that's the truth, because he had a bill behind the bar, and it was on near beers and stuff like that, and he'd be buying things for different people in Broadmoor. So £7,000 quickly went, and as I believe, so I've been told, there was very little money left, you know, from the film. It just went like nothing. And that film's been going the rounds for an awful long time. What did I think of the film? I think it did the Kemp brothers an awful lot of good. You know, it's a pop film. It was difficult. So what I used to do was go on to New Street Station. Tony was in. They didn't want us to build a power base, so they put Tony in Wormwood Scrubs Hostel, and I was going to go. I went to Birmingham, prison in Birmingham, Winston Green, and I was on the hostel there. And so for the first kind of couple of weeks, I would go to New Street Station, and I would sit there and watch the way people interacted with each other. You've got to remember, we don't see women. In our day, there was no women prison officers. So everything we know about women, we're reading from pornographic books. And we think every woman is just a slag. You understand what I mean? Every woman is you know, go with anybody, do anything, and that's the way you kind of view them. But I knew that wasn't the truth. So I want to see human action. And I sit on the station and I watch people coming and going, meeting each other, greeting each other, wife putting her arms around her husband, you know, the husband, like, joy on his face, little children to see their dad or their mum, you know what I mean? I got the whole picture, black and white, you know, the whole thing. And I'd go and have a coffee in a coffee bar there, just a normal coffee bar, and watch people talking to each other. You know, I'd not done that in years. I mean, I was kind of, it was all a new world to me. And I can remember the screw saying to me, he said, Lamrianu, he said, you're not looking for work. He said, we're thinking about putting you back behind the wall. I didn't never want to go back behind that wall. I'd been back behind the wall for 15 years. And for the first time, I could see the stars and, you know, the moon. I could do things. So I kind of, that's really where I wanted to be. But, you know, circumstances, I've been very blessed in my life. Was one of the guys there broke his bail hostel thing, and he had a job as a carpenter, and he lost his place on the hostel, and so I said, the screw said, he's going to put me back behind the wall. I said, look, because he thought I was up to gangsterism stuff and all that, but he didn't know I was sitting on a station doing what I was doing, and so I said, is that guy coming back? He said, no. He said, he's lost his place on the hostel. I said, well, he had a job. Why don't you take me for his job? He went, you don't really want a job. I said, no, you take me. And he picked the challenge up and he came with me. And we went to this company called C&E Roofing. And I spoke with the director there. But the screw talked to him before and he think, well, you know who this guy is. He's involved with this, so. And I went in. The guy said to me, you ever interfered with children? I said, no. Have you ever bashed up old women? I said, no. He said, you ever robbed any poor people? I said, no, I haven't. He said, right. He said, you start Monday morning. The screw was totally blown away by this. But I had to get a hammer and kind of screwdrivers and things. So I managed to buy a hammer for £1. And I mean, a saw, I think I paid about £3 or £4 for that. So I've got them in a bag and I turn up there and he says to me, do this job. And he put me with this guy called Alan, who knew that I'd, you know, kind of done an awful lot of bird, and he was going to give me grief. You know, so I thought myself, I'd had enough of him this day and I just put him in his place. So they decided to let me go and work on my own. So they said to me, look, there's an outside guttering, sort that out, fascia board. I've got up there, I've made a pig's ear of it, I'm not a carpenter. But there's a little old black man. I've seen him standing there for about a week, and he's got a boiler suit done up there and a trilby hat on. I said, excuse me, mate. I said, who you work for? He said, C&E Roofing. I said, well, I've seen you standing there for a week. He said, yeah, they're going to give me a job. I said, well, they ain't giving you one in a week. They're not going to give you one. The reason is you're black, and they're not going to give you a job because of that reason. I said, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you a job. We got a right idiot working at this firm. I said, come along, I'll show you what he done. I said, see that fascia board? He put that up there. I said, look at the mess he's made of that. Do you think you could sort that out? And I'm testing him out. And he said, yeah, he said, I'll have a go at that. Very humble man. And I went off to have a cup of coffee, and I came back about an hour later, and he had done the most perfect job. And I said, what's your name? He said, Joe. I said, well, I'm Chris. I said, I'm the idiot who done that. I said, I'm not a carpenter. I said, but I tell you what I am, Joe. I'm the best labourer you'll ever meet in your life. And I said, can we work together? He said, yeah, we can. And him and I, we worked together. And I said to him one day, I said, Joe, look, see these roofs? I said, we can go on piecework. I'll get a chainsaw, I said, and we'll go through these. He said, Chris, slow down. He said, we're craftsmen, not butchers. And another time, we could get the Welsh blue slates off and we could sell them. And I said, Joe, like, what about it? He said, no, we don't take something that doesn't belong to us. But everybody took it for granted you could have them, but not Joe. He was an honest man. And it was like my father died in prison. It was like I found my father again. Joe, you know, it's... and then I did my time was there, finished, and I'd met a girl in Banbury and who stood by me. And so I had to go down there. And I thought my brother had a job for me down there because I'd taken sitting guilds and got a welding degree. And I'd go and work out in Saudi. And Joe was in tears when I left. He said, you know, but I knew he was safe then. I knew we were both safe. He'd been a real blessing to me, and I think I had to him, you know. So I had good help along the way. No, because I didn't want to be used, to be honest with you. And it seemed to me that they used an awful lot of people to do their running about and do that. I was too busy bringing up 5 children. You know, I mean, I've got my 2 twins. You know, I had my own twins. You know, they became priority to me. You know, I love pushing them in a chair, going through the village, singing to them in the morning, you know, and all that kind of thing. So I took them all to church, 5 of them to church, every Sunday to St Aldate's in Oxford. And then, because what I wanted to do, might sound crazy to you, but for me, some of the finest educators in England are in Oxford. And a lot of them people go to church and they do good works within the church. So Sunday school, they were getting the very best. I got a telephone call telling me Ronnie had died. And I'd been to a funeral prior to that, and I spoke to somebody there, and I said, why are you here? And they said, I've come to see all the gangsters. I said, did you actually know this person who died? And this woman said, no, I haven't. She said, but I like the glitz of it all and everything else. And when I didn't realise the funeral was going to be that big, but I didn't go. Because I, out of respect, I can say my goodbyes, I can say my farewells in a quiet way, you know, instead of, you know, there were thousands there at that funeral. And then there was Reggie's funeral, just the same, another circus. And I didn't want to join it. And then my brother Tony died, and he had the same kind of circus. Because what happens is people take over. And they want to glam it up, and they want to have this kind of circus that goes with it. And if I remember one thing about my brother's funeral, it was Jamie Foreman. And he said I stood at the graveside with him, and I was saying my goodbye, but I can remember him saying, "Tony, you were a friend. It was good to know you. And at some other stage we'll meet again." And I felt that was very humble and very quiet, and not, I'm here, I'm suited and booted and all the rest of it, and that. And I respected him for the way he did that. But then there were other funerals. I mean, Bruce Reynolds, I was away with him and I went there. Charlie's, of course, I went there. And, and Joe Pile's another one, turned into a circus. And I think funerals are private things where you go along and you say your goodbye and you're just grateful for that person being in your life. I wasn't grateful that the Krays were in my life, to be honest with you. I had 15 years to regret it. So, but, I don't think I ever wished them ill or anything else like that. My regret is I let my family down. And that's in retrospect. I wasn't a perfect human being. I should have been. But I couldn't do it. I could not do it. The legacy of the Krays. Crime don't pay. Charlie Kray died in prison. Reggie Kray died in prison. Ronnie Kray died in prison. For whatever they achieved in life was such a small amount to what they might have achieved. What they could have done, the possibilities that lay within them men for good. And yet they choose to just drop everything down the drain like it didn't matter, really. They sold themselves cheaply. That's what I believe. I believe there's so much they could have done. If it was criminal, they could have been a bit more professional. If it was for good, they could have reached heights. But their lives were dashed to 3 people to die in prison. That's a testimony itself that crime doesn't pay. I've been out of prison 32 years now. I've had some wonderful experiences. Whatever I found in prison works. I've never been back, except to give talks or whatever, or maybe to warn people, crime doesn't work, it doesn't pay.
Thanks for watching this mini-series on Chris Lambrianou. For more content on the Krays and other notorious gangsters, make sure to like, hype and subscribe. I'm Nick from Underworld Uncut. We'll see you next time.